It's a very great pleasure for me today to introduce Naomi Barron as for the quality of her work and for the quality of her friendship. I'll read my introduction. Naomi Barron is Professor Emerita of Linguistics at American University in Washington, D.C. She's a former Guggenheim Fellow and Fulbright Fellow. She has also taught at Brown University and at Gothenburg University. Plus, she reports being delighted and proud, and we're more delighted and certainly proud. She has taught in Modena at Unimore during the spring semester 2019. It was a real pleasure to have her with us, and so we keep asking her to be with us. Her research has spanned many topics, including the relationship between spoken and written language, computer-mediated communication, the history and structure of English, child language acquisition, and higher education. For more than 20 years, she has focused on the impact of technology on language, social interaction, and learning. Results from this work have appeared in her books, Alphabet to Email, which was the first I read and then got in touch and followed the preparation of all the others, Always On. And for the past decade, she has turned particular attention to how medium influences the way we read. Her book's Words on Screen represents the first phase of this work. Her newest book, How We Read Now, Strategic Choices for Print, Screen and Audio, is due out early next year. For reasons that she will explain, that I don't know, the title of today's lecture is slightly different from the one announced. Her new title is Reading in Print Boring? A Tale of Two Lectures. Naomi, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marina, and thank you for putting together this wonderful series of lectures. I have gotten up at 4 o'clock in the morning, my time here in Washington, to be able to hear some of them. My title, as announced, is Reading in Print Boring? A Tale of Two Lectures. Let's see why. Except my slides will not advance. Here, okay. So why 2 lectures? Originally, as we know, there was going to be this marvelous Modena summer school, and we were all going to get together and talk. And back in February, I had actually drafted much of my presentation. This is before the coronavirus had really seriously been acknowledged in the United States. I know things were happening in Italy. But the world changed in March 2020. All over the world, of course. We felt it here in the States, where after a little bit of scrambling, when the universities gradually closed down and we shifted to distant learning, we also shifted to digital materials. There was a vast increase in the use of the internet, whether that was Zoom or social media or access to reading materials. And if you are doing your learning online, the implications are you're probably going to be doing your reading online. All right, so a number of new issues have come up in terms of what is of interest to me, namely how we read in different media. Namely, has the pandemic altered the ways in which we value different reading media? And by reading media, I'm talking about print, I'm talking about things on the digital screen, also in terms of some of my other research, listening to audio. And then will these, if we have changed our attitudes, not just our usage patterns, but our attitudes, will these changes last? These are the questions I think we most need to think about, to which we do not yet have, and for which we do not yet have data, but we're going to get there. Okay, why is the title, and forgive me, they're mowing grass in my neck of the woods, so I have to close the windows so you don't hear the mowers. Why is reading in print boring? All right, I've been interested, as Marina so kindly said, in differences between the ways we actually do reading in terms of different media and the attitudes we have towards print, and then specifically digital, by which I mean screens for now. So the questions that I've asked in the past, and many others have as well, have been on which medium do students seem to concentrate best or learn best, depending upon the kind of question you ask. So that's a kind of long-range question, not asking about a specific test you're taking right now on a short passage you're asked to read, but what do you think in the long run is best for concentrating or for learning? In the course of doing that research for the pieces that I did myself, I was first astounded and then felt I need to look into why so many students were saying they were finding reading on digital media to be boring. And that's what I would like to get to by the end of our talk today. Since the cover for the book that's coming out at the end of February is now available, I figured I would show you the fruits of that graphic labor. Okay, reading past, present, and future. So what we'll do today is divide up the presentation into 3 sections. The first is reading past, which if you think of Charles Dickens and Christmas Carol, you know, past, well, this past is just 2019. That's lecture 1. Lecture 2 is what's been going on since March to right now. The last week in the United States in November doesn't count, so I'm only going through November. I'm only going through October, excuse me. And then to think about what the future could look like or might look like. And there I'd love to get your suggestions and comments as we get to the question part of the presentation, or of the discussion rather. A few notes. I'll be largely focusing on education and learning issues, although there are clear ramifications for anybody reading for pleasure, reading for business, because the same kinds of psychological variables obtain. I'll be using extensively US data, in part because that's what I have and it's what I know. And also you'll see a number of references scattered through the presentation. If you're interested, I have a bibliography put together for all the references. Just email me and I'm happy to send it to you. All right, reading past, lecture 1, which is pre-pandemic. Here's just an overview of what we'll talk about. We'll talk about print versus digital issues in an educational context, print versus digital issues looking at some recent research, and the research for recent is up through about 2 years ago, and then we'll look at more recent research that is post-pandemic, or that makes us rethink post-pandemic. We'll talk about some really curious divergences between what's happening in the trade market in sales, you know, general common reading, public reading, versus educational trends. Again, then too is reading boring, and then we'll look at some takeaways from this first lecture, this first pre-pandemic discussion. Okay, the educational context for reading in print versus reading digitally. The underlying question has been, are reading in the 2 media equivalent? And equivalent can mean many things. Obviously, you have touch and feel and haptics for what you're reading in print and all the things that go with that. And there are various other things that are digital, but I'm going to focus on the learning issue. Where is there equivalence? If you look at the early phase of the research, from around 2010 to around 2016, give or take, you'll find that there were a large number of comprehension studies done in many countries throughout Europe and in the United States, largely with college students. And the results have been significantly inconclusive, either because they showed reading the 2 media were equivalent, or one study said this and the other study said the other. There's a review of this literature in my earlier book, Words on Screen, if you want to see that literature discussed. Overwhelmingly, these comprehension studies were done by giving a passage to read, maybe 500 words, maybe a few fewer, maybe a few more, and then doing an immediate comprehension test. However, there are also a couple of what I'll call perception studies, where you asked students, do you think that you concentrate best, you learn best, you remember best on one medium or another? And depending on the study, different questions were asked about concentration or learning or remembering, but this was more the long-term haul not how do you think you did on that specific test. And there's a study that I did with 2 graduate students, and then Diane Misrachi and her colleagues had another study as well. Again, you can get all the references from me if you'd like them. All right. The more recent research, which I've reviewed in the newest book, but I'm happy to share, is showing a different picture. There have been 3 so-called meta-analyses done of previous studies where there was analysis of comprehension studies that were done, studies that met certain kinds of experimental criteria. And the findings on all 3 of those studies are that if you look overall, comprehension is better with print. Now, the thing to remember is these comprehension studies are tests of, call it roughly 500 words passages, 300 word, 500, 600. They're not how much have you learned in the long haul. Curiously or paradoxically, over the years, if you look at the early studies in these meta-analyses and the later studies in the meta-analyses, students seem to be doing even better in print in the more recent studies, which is not what you expect because people are doing more and more reading digitally. I think the paradox is actually solved by the next thing that I want to point up, namely the kinds of questions that we're now asking in the studies being done in recent years. Recent here meaning 2016, 17, 18, 19, and so forth. That is, we're asking more sophisticated questions. Instead of asking superficial questions, which I like to call picking up pebbles on the beach, where you just say, oh, the answer's right there, I can pluck it out. People are asking more abstract questions that require you to make an inference from what you've read. Or they're looking for more details in the text rather than the overall gist. Or in a wonderful study that Anna Mangen at the Reading Center at the University of Stavanger in Norway did, she's asking where in this short story did an event appear and when in the chronology. And again, finding with these more probing kinds of questions that print is showing to be superior. And these are questions that people have only been asking more recently. However, there's a mismatch between the way students think they're doing on a test and how they actually do on a test. So when that question was asked in some of the earlier studies, 2012, 2013, 14, people would say, I think I did better on the print. What they're now saying, not all of them, but this now goes for college students and it goes for some students in the study in Israel in the 4th and 5th grades. They're now saying, oh, I did better on the digital. They actually did better on the print. So there's a calibration issue between what they think they did and what they actually did on a test. Okay, more on recent research. I did a study with several colleagues at the International School of Stavanger in Norway a year ago when it was still possible to travel and do research. And we talked with, I got data from, actually it was an online survey, from middle and high school students. And one of the questions we asked is, do you think you concentrate better with print, with a computer, with an ebook, with a cell phone, and so forth? And what they said, sorry, mobile phone, same deal, is that 85% said, I concentrate better with print. And 71% when asked the specific question about learning said they learn better. But remember, some things are actually probably better learned on a digital screen because of the availability of video and hyperlinks and so forth. Okay, but keep in mind, there's a difference between how people think constitutionally they concentrate or learn as opposed to how they do on a one-off test. Another thing that we've learned we really need to think about is the difference between what the media are themselves and what the so-called affordances are that lead us to act one way or another simply because you can hold it in your hand as print or because you view it on a screen with digital. We also need to think about mindset, which is sometimes referred to roughly as metacognition. That is, what kinds of expectations do we have when we approach a medium? So when we're reading digitally, we tend to think we can read faster. And I have data to prove that people think I can read faster on digital, even if it's the same text that you would read in print. we tend to say, oh yeah, I can multitask. And again, I have data saying, yeah, I'm more likely to multitask when I'm reading digitally than when reading in print. And we're looking to be entertained. And again, the students themselves are telling us that I find it much more entertaining to read digitally. A hypothesis called the so-called shallowing hypothesis has been proposed that suggests that we tend to adopt what we'll call a social media mindset when we're reading linear text on a screen. That is, we are thinking about how we should approach what we see on a screen, and it's our own minds telling us how we should look rather than specifically the medium itself. All right, let's turn to what people are buying. Looking first at trade sales. Again, this is pre-pandemic. I won't read the numbers to you. You can pretty much see them. Print has been holding comparatively steady, excuse me, over the last 4 years or so. Give or take, if there's a bestseller in print, the numbers shoot up and so forth. Similarly, if there was something only available as an ebook. But what you'll see is a dramatic drop in ebooks between 2016 and 2019. We will get to pandemic time soon. And then an astounding growth in audio downloads, okay? And that has been fairly consistent in where people are putting their money. The college situation is radically different. So if you look at the sales, these are published by the Association of American Publishers. Again, I'm looking at US data. If you look at the sales for 2018, 2019, there has been a growing decline in how much students are spending on so-called learning materials. That includes books, whether they're digital or print. It includes the test materials, homework materials that publishers are making students buy if you want to be able to do your homework and pass the class and so forth. That has been declining. I just saw a statistic this morning, my time, that in fall 2020, the amount of money that US college students spent on average for learning materials for this fall semester was $186 US. The thing to remember is the projections that are given to incoming college students on how much to budget for textbooks per semester is around $700 US. Students are not spending that money. Okay, why? Well, there are a number of reasons. We'll get to some of them in a moment, but the first thing to know about is if they're acquiring a book at all, and not all are, they're not necessarily acquiring one they want to keep. Very big in the US textbook market is rental. My understanding is this has not permeated Europe or other parts of the world yet. Roughly 35%, this is last year's figures, but it'll be even bigger now, of the textbook market is rental. That's not all digital, but it's heavily digital. However, a study that was done in 2014, but I'm pretty sure the data are fairly accurate even today, is around 65% of students reported they didn't acquire a book in any format, purchase, rental, because they felt it cost too much. The rental books still do cost. Okay. In the educational venue, it's important to know that pre-pandemic, there was already a very strong digital move. So the move to digital textbooks has been going on for a number of years now, which is the reverse of the trade story. So you saw those trade digital sales going down and going down and going down over the last 4 years. That's not what happened in terms of digital textbooks. The digital move is in part driven by cost, because digital books are less expensive than print, and in part by convenience and access. So if, for example, you're taking a course remotely and you say, I travel, it's much easier to have the materials on your computer than it is to have to carry your books around. Okay. But there are other elements to the digital move as well. The number of courses that have gone online in the United States is huge. This is pre-pandemic. There are states in the United States now that require their K through 12, that is beginning kindergarten through high school, to have taken at least 1 or 2 online courses before they graduate as a way to teach them how to do online courses. And now everybody's doing online courses. OERs, open educational resources, which exists to some extent in other parts of the world, but are huge in the United States. They are freely available materials, sometimes funded by foundations. They're overwhelmingly digital, and you could print them out, and you could buy a print version of something that's an open educational resource for very little money, but very few people are doing that. There's also a move by 3 of the major textbook publishers, Pearson, McGraw-Hill Education, and Cengage, to develop what is called inclusive access. Boy, does that sound warm and fuzzy. What it means is your school signs up with one of these publishers and gets you access digitally to any of the textbooks that or learning materials more broadly, that publisher publishes. The first day of class, you have all your books digitally. We have them all. And you pay a fee to your school, and the school then pays that fee back to the publisher. Another move by Pearson, which is a huge publisher, it's many billions of dollars per year, called Digital First, started a year ago. And what they said is, we're now going to publish all of our books first digitally. Print, oh, well, we'll do that afterwards. And by the way, we're not going to update the print very often, because why bother? No one's going to buy it anyway. And they have made their pricing such that the digital is less expensive to rent than print is. Okay. More on the digital turn. There has been a large effort by a well-meaning community of people interested in online learning. And there was this quotation I could not resist sharing. I don't know this woman. She means well. The article was called, "Instructors Can Help Students Prefer Digital Texts." Nudge, nudge. Instructors who model effective use of digital text in learning can help students overcome their preference for print. Oh, heaven help us. And take advantage of the convenience and lower costs offered by digital text. So there was this move, again, pre-pandemic. And we'll understand in a moment why, given the cost of textbooks, because they still are deathly expensive in the United States, and tuition is deathly expensive, why faculty are saying, okay, use the digital, it's fine. It's equivalent, right? Doesn't happen to be right, but that's been the assumption. Okay, so faculty have been concerned about the cost of textbooks. I did a study with my colleague Anna Mangan, interviewing faculty both in the United States and in Norway about how much reading they were assigning, and was digital technology changing the kinds of things they assign, and did they think students were reading in the same way as they used to read? Were they reading more shallowly with digital? All those kinds of questions. But we also asked about cost of textbooks. And what one of the people from the United States, the faculty members from the United States said is, "I cannot in good conscience ask my students to pay the outrageous cost of books. I use web available materials and academic journal articles." And they do this because students don't have enough money. I mean, it's for real. A second issue is students, comparatively speaking, compared with how they see their parents, often see educators as authority figures. And if their teachers are saying that learning digitally is equivalent to learning in print, it's understandable for students not to question the suggestion of the faculty members that they should read digitally, even if those exact same students say they believe they concentrate or learn or remember best with print. Is reading in print boring? This is an old cartoon that I used 3 books ago that I hauled out and copied. It's from the Providence Journal in 1981. And there's this little kid who's handed a book and is not too clear what to do with it, and eventually tosses it off and is back to the television. Well, these days it's not back to the television. These days it's to digital, and particularly social media, and maybe a shallowing hypothesis mindset of social media when you go to read something in print. Why might print be boring? Okay. What are the reader's assumptions? And again, we have data from students that back this up. The first is students feel that if you read it digitally, it's going to be shorter. Well, why might then if we read it in print, even if it's exactly the same number of words, why might they do that? Well, in print, you see how much there is. With digital, maybe you see a page number, but you don't know what that, or a slide number, but you don't know what that really refers to, how long it takes to get through. And there have been many students who have told me, well, it's shorter to read digitally. That's why I like reading digitally. Now, they also maybe read faster, maybe don't. If they're multitasking, they don't read faster. So that's a complex story. There's an assumption on the part of many students that the print text will be less interesting. Again, even if it's exactly the same words as you see online. And the reason for that, I suspect, is that there's so much that you're reading online that is often more lively. It has color, it may have animation. You may be able to multitask while you're reading it, and therefore the content feels more lively. Going therefore to the issue of, do you believe it's okay to multitask when you're reading digitally? And when I've asked this question of students, more students have said, yeah, I do multitask more when I read digitally than I do when I'm reading in print. The reason that no longer is a good question to ask is if students have their mobile phones right next to what they're reading, they can multitask just as easily, still reading print. Okay, another issue is how much energy, how much concentration does it take to read in print versus digitally? There was a theory developed a number of years ago called AIM, Amount of Invested Mental Energy. This was done comparing reading print versus watching the same material on television. And what it showed is the students said, yeah, I learned just as much if I see the material on television as if I read it. But no, they didn't. They actually learned more if they read in print. The same kind of mindset, I think, we're back to mindset, I think is applying to digital. You feel it's faster, you feel it's easier, you feel it takes less effort and energy. And again, we have some data from students suggesting they actually do feel this. Okay, again, why might print be boring? Technological affordances that we've already talked a little bit about. There's more liveliness that's possible with digital than there is most of what is in print. And there's also a feeling of control and then user activity. So with digital, you can do things. You can change the font, you can change the types. In many documents, there are hyperlinks, you can move around, you can post things, you can share things, you can interact with other readers. Whereas when you're working on your own, you're on your own. Boring, so they say. Okay, some of the comments from students. This is a study done by the National Literacy Trust in the UK. Came out in 2011, so the data are probably 2010-ish, of middle school students. Just listing the kinds of things they didn't like about reading in print. Quote, I get bored when I'm reading paper books. I don't know why, it just seems to drag. Or, on paper, there's just too many words on the page, and it's too long. You get confused. When you read on paper, it's a bit boring, unless it's something you're really into. On a tablet, it feels more interesting. It reminds me of when I'm texting someone. Social media. Okay, some more comments. These came from the students in Norway at the International School of Stavanger, middle and high school. When we asked, what do you like most, what do you like least about reading in print? Same questions about reading digitally. What do they not like about reading in print? It looks boring, so I get distracted easily. It makes me feel like it's long and boring. You see there's a theme here. It gets boring faster. Print can tire you out really fast and get boring, no matter how interesting the book is. When we asked what people didn't like about reading digitally on a screen, nobody said, I don't like reading on a screen because it's boring. Okay, what kinds of praise did people have for things that were digital? And here I'm combining some of the comments from the research that I did myself with my graduate students and the study we did at with the secondary school students at the International School of Stavanger. Okay, what do you like most about digital reading? It looks shorter to read on. It keeps me awake. It can be more entertaining. Okay, so the cautionary tale is yesterday's television is today's digital screen. And then remember, these students are becoming tomorrow's mature readers. What will their reading habits look like? Okay, for takeaways, just to summarize, for concentration and overall learning, students favor print. Students generally perform better in print when they're taking comprehension tests. However, they tend to believe that they do better digitally. And a number of students are indeed saying print is boring, and they're saying digital is so much more entertaining. Take a breath, lecture 2, coping with the pandemic. Just an overview of what we're going to be looking at. We'll get to them all. Okay. Early in the pandemic, in the United States anyway, there was a video call done instead of conferences with members of the Book Industry Study Group, which is a major group within the United States of people involved in the publishing industry, both print and those leaning towards digital. And the question is, how are things going? What are people doing? Reorders for reprint orders were down. So some of the people who manufacture books were also part of this call. There's a Book Manufacturers Institute in the United States, so they care a lot about our people wanting print books. Orders were down, first printings were delayed. There was just a lot of chaos. In one county in Florida, which right now in the United States we watched for different reasons, namely how are they voting? But in the library, they're all switching, all the purchases were switched to digital. And by the way, this is now happening across the United States. One of the past chairs of the Book Industry Study Group said, ebooks and demand for digital are the heroes of the crisis. And that's true, because otherwise there would be no text available to read for many, many people. Okay, commenting around the same time, a person who I don't know, who writes his own, the new publishing standard, nonetheless said some interesting things. This is back in April. He's talking about Spain in the first part of this. It's estimated that at least 50,000 readers in Spain have transitioned to digital reading, ebooks and audiobooks in the past 3 weeks. And I'm sure that number has risen, not just in Spain, but around the world. We'll look at some numbers in a minute. When this is over, so writes Mark Williams, digital books will play a far larger part in the lives of consumers and publishers than we could have imagined as this new decade began just a short few months ago. That is absolutely the case. We truly don't know what's going to happen. Digital probably will now be reversing, at least in the short run, that decline that it had in sales until fairly recently. A favorite of mine. Not the magazine, but what it represents here. Playboy magazine, one of the entertainment for gentlemen, that is the subtitle of Playboy magazine. It used to be what all high school and college, not all, some number of high school and college males or even junior high school males wanted to get their hands on because it had unclad females in it. They are now going digital. They cannot keep up print sales. Are they the canary in the mine for at least the magazine industry? We don't know yet. Because you can't go to a newsstand in the United States and just pick this up because most of us aren't going to newsstands. All right, trade publishing. I've been trying to get as recent statistics as I can. The report here for comparing September 2020 to September 2019, the dollars are the revenues as opposed to unit sales, again, from the Association of American Publishers, which represents all the major publishers in the United States. It's not self-published stuff or very small presses. Okay, the comparisons are, books are selling. That's great. Adult books, professional books, and sometimes there's an overlap in categories, but we're just looking at the fact people are buying books. They're buying books because they're stuck at home. And they're buying some paper books, that is hardback and paperback. Ebooks, this is trade, this is not university, are up 22.1%. And then you get to university press ebooks and you say, wow, so they're doing okay, right? That's because 90% of university education in the United States is now being done only online. okay? Libraries are buying digital as fast as they can and not buying print because because most libraries are closed to anybody to walk in. So the only way students can get access to books for their online classes is digitally. However, total revenues are still down. It's not as bad as it was, but it's a kind of mixed bag. Okay, what's happening in the publishing world and the book manufacturing world? As an author, I follow these things. Publishers are delaying the issuing of a number of books that were supposed to come out in spring 2020 often didn't come out. They're postponed until fall or spring 2021. A lot of contracts are just being canceled. There's a real question of how many titles publishers will be able to afford. Don't try selling a manuscript to an American publisher right now. You will have no luck. And it's not clear how much print people are going to want. Publishers make their money on hard copy. They make their money particularly on hardbacks. So it costs a lot more if you say, well, we'll only issue it digitally. They're not making as much on it. So it's not clear how much they can afford to publish. In the early months of the pandemic in the United States, so we'll call this March, April into early May, the Book Manufacturers Institute, I happened to speak, it ended up being remotely at their conference, their business was down 30 or 40%. Then interestingly, there were a number of blockbusters, often books having to do with Donald Trump, such as Too Much and Never Enough by Mary Trump, his niece, which sold almost a million copies in pre-order. And the people bought it in print. So there were some blockbusters and we had a paper shortage and therefore couldn't print the books we wanted to. Okay, book sales statistics, some real issues. These are sales figures from the US Census Bureau on the drop in bookstore sales. You can see the numbers for yourself. In April, things were horrible because bookstores were all basically closed except for a little bit of curbside pickup. August, things are a little better. We're only off 30.7%. The first 6 months of the year, down almost 33%. However, it's Amazon that's doing the selling, not brick and mortar book sales, because they account for, we don't know exactly because they don't publish their figures, roughly 70% of all online book sales, and that's both print and digital. Migrating education online. Okay. The new Great Migration, the earlier Great Migration took place the first half to basically 1960 rather, in the United States, with populations of African Americans moving north. But there's a new Great Migration, and that is of what's happening with courses. And again, this is in the university setting in the United States. In April, 76% of college courses had quickly moved online. But something else was happening at the same time. 17% of faculty just eliminated some of the readings they had originally assigned back in January. Our semester starts in January. 48% of the faculty had lowered their expectations for the amount of work they expected students to do. And 46% had dropped some assignments or exams. So education was taking a real hit. And the same thing, I promise you, is happening this fall in the United States. It's really hard to take all your classes online, particularly if you have other things going on in your life, like a job that you're also doing online. Okay, faculty perspectives. There was a survey that Emma Pettit had done back again, April, March, whatever it was. And she asked faculty, so what do you feel you're doing as opposed to this other more student-centered perspective? They said, we're getting rid of the textbooks, we're assigning shorter chunks, we're replacing written texts with podcasts and videos. And then Emma Pettit asked, well, what about your own reading? And they said, I can't concentrate. I can't do it with the depth and breadth that I used to. I'm skimming things, I'm rereading things, nothing is sticking. If you are in the United States right now, even before the election issue with the pandemic and shutdowns of varying sorts, the big question is, what are you doing to reduce your stress? Now we have double stress. People are having a lot of trouble focusing on anything, whether it's print or digital. Okay, a shift in reading material. So let's see what's happened. There has been ongoing, and this was pre-pandemic, a shift from assigning whole books to assigning articles or chapters. There was an interesting warm-up for this exercise of what's going on right now in 2009. And that was when we were afraid that the H1N1 epidemic would become a pandemic. And faculty in my own institution and lots of others were told, figure out what you do if we have to close the universities, as they did in Oxford and Cambridge for the plague. Okay, what are you going to do? Well, we have to make things digitally available so if students can come to campus. If you can't come to campus, they could still read. By copyright law, you can scan one chapter of a book, one article from a journal, and we started changing the kinds of assignments we gave back in 2009, long before we got to COVID-19. Okay. Meanwhile, libraries are shifting their acquisitions increasingly to digital because in part of cost issues and part of access issues. If 3 o'clock in the morning you want to get a book and we have the digital copy, that's great. Whether you read it the same way you would read the print issue, that's another story. And then there are various textbook publishers initiatives that have taken place with the pandemic. Again, in the United States, if an order had been placed with a publisher for print books, they immediately made the digital available to all students because students thought they were only leaving campus for 2 weeks and left all their books there. No, they're not coming back. And then a number of the publishers made a lot of their digital offers available just for free, which was useful. Okay, so what is happening now and what are some of the continuing challenges? The pandemic, I will argue, is a magnifier of trends. The trends have been going on before, but what's happening with the pandemic is making them writ larger. So replacing the print with digital, using selections of books, not whole books. People finding print to be boring, sometimes by no fault of their own. Life is really a challenge these days. More and more podcasts and videos are being used to replace a lot of the text. Then again, in the United States, because tuition is expensive most places, there are some real institutional budgetary realities. The amount of tuition that is lost because not as many students have come back to school for digital learning. They said, you want me to spend $35,000 or $40,000 or $50,000 in tuition for online learning? No, thank you. And yes, those figures are correct. But also, much of American education is residential. So there's your dormitory room, there's board, there are sports revenues that come into larger institutions, and there are massive deficits in university budgets. Just to take my own university, American University here in Washington, the projected shortfall for this fiscal year, meaning ending in 2021, is $160 million. Which is 10% of the entire operating budget. That's a lot of money. You have to figure out where to make it up. So you economize wherever you can. And one of the things that you economize on is book purchases. So it's not just students, it's also institutions. Okay, so what are the takeaways that I see? There's a growth in ebook sales, plus there is a fair amount of print, but it's for, we'll call it pandemic de-stressing reading. The biggest sellers are science fiction and horror books and romance and political books and social justice books, I should add. And there are huge challenges for bookstores and for publishers. In education, there's this explosion of doing everything online, including our reading, and that is overwhelmingly digital. And it's really hard to concentrate on anything. Okay, let's get positive and think about the future. Let's look at some of the market challenges for print. Let's talk about what happens with attention and what are some of the unknowns as we go forward. Okay, so the market challenges. What trends do the data, at least from April 2020, suggest? And these get updated month by month, but this is what I've got. Okay, a 10% decline in print sales, and that's probably going to be about right. Maybe it's going to be a little less. That is, there have been surges of sales in political books over the summer, the spring and the summer, and now the election's over, they're going to die down. The retail ebooks have been going up, as we saw from those figures from the Association of American Publishers. And I think that's going to continue to happen. Library ebooks, this was back in April, they were going up 130%. I'll bet it's probably up now 200% if they have the money to buy the books, because the costs of ebooks for libraries are not cheap. And publishers do not give them nice deals. What's really interesting is the surge on Google of searches for free books. Okay, so one of the questions in the publishing industry is, how much are we going to publish? How much can we afford to publish? Are we going to take new contracts? Are we going to give advances? Can authors afford to write if they don't get an advance? Okay, the attention challenge. Let me stop before I get to the slide and talk about something most of you probably know about or have read some version of, the work of Nicholas Carr, who wrote an article for The Atlantic back in around 2010-ish, Is Google Making Us Stupid? And then wrote a follow-up book on that. And what he argued is, as many people have, think about this shallowing hypothesis, but he argued it a decade ago, is that we have difficulty concentrating in print because when we read digitally, we develop a particular mindset that doesn't favor concentration. Okay, if that was true 10 years ago, what's true now? As so much, even pre-pandemic, as so much of our reading has gone online, and as our attention span is getting really diminished, the phrase is, I have the attention of a wet squeegee, from so many factors. Okay, so let's now talk about what we saw in the first lecture, that is pre-pandemic. Students concentrate best with print, though some find print boring and digital more entertaining. From the second lecture, there's this massive move to digital in education and this massive rise, comparatively speaking, because I'm sure it's even larger now than it was in that figure we just saw, the 25% in April, in trade books, and this difficulty in concentrating. All right, where does this leave us? An interesting study was done. I have a reference for you if you want to look it up, to try to explain why we have difficulty focusing our attention. But you want to know what's going on. And the hypothesis, backed up by some data, is this: that stress, which indeed many of us are feeling in many parts of the world, the stress shifts the way we are using our brain from the prefrontal cortex, which is where we do the cognitive work and where we do mental focus. It's shifting from the prefrontal cortex to more use of the so-called primitive brain, which is what exists for survival skills and for stress response. So if our brain power, if our cognition, or mental functioning more generally, because that mental functioning controls all of our body, our physical moves as well as our cognitive moves, if that is now being split more towards the primitive brain part of us, there's less left for focusing. There's less left for cognitive work. So what are the implications for reading medium? Print, we know, is perceived as meriting and probably does require more concentration than digital, in part because we tend to read more serious stuff in print and things that we feel we can get away with not having to focus that much on digitally and digital materials. And the question is, if we have a shortened attention span, think about that AIM data that shows, how much energy are you willing to invest? If we have a shortened attention span and we think it's going to take more effort to read in print, are we going to opt for print? Whether we're right or not about whether it takes the same amount of effort, are we going to opt for print? Okay, some unknowns. They're the cost issues. The first question is, how much expendable income will people have? In the United States, and I know this is true in many other parts of the world where first there was some financial support from the government and then that has gone away. In the United States, it went away big time. Will we have money to buy print books? And the answer is, if print is more expensive than digital, a lot of people will have to vote with their pocketbook if they're going to be able to buy books at all. The second is, in terms of what's available for free, think about those open educational resources. There's more that's available for free digitally than is available in print. And then there's the question of whether we will have had an attitudinal shift about what should be free. I mean, we used to think you get what you pay for. If you need to spend some money, it's worth doing. Going to a concert, if you had to buy a concert ticket and it was expensive, you got to hear this wonderful symphony, the Berlin Philharmonic or whatever, play. Now, so many concerts are free online. Admissions to museums are digital and free in many cases. Will we be willing to spend for the things, even if we had the income, that we used to think were worth investing our money in? Then there's the preference issue. And there's a question of whether we're going to more strongly embrace digital because we've had so much more experience with it, or will we yearn for print? And this issue is especially relevant for students when it comes to learning and developing mindsets about how one should learn. And then there's a question of the role of screen fatigue. Clearly people have Zoom fatigue. I hope you don't today. I will mention that my colleagues who had done the study and let's try that again, in Norway last year, had a study all primed and ready to go for middle and high school students in Amsterdam and back in Norway. But because of the pandemic, there's so many other things, particularly in Amsterdam, that are on people's minds. We have not been able to run the study. So I don't have more data for you. But one of the questions we were asking on this redo of our study was, how have things changed in your mind because of online learning, in terms of whether you think you learn more digitally or in print, whether you prefer one medium or another, and if so, why? So I had hoped to have some data for you by this lecture, but the pandemic did us in. Okay, other unknowns going forward. Will our ability to concentrate when we read return, even to the pre-pandemic levels that Carr talked about? Okay. And then there's a question of whether we still will have some belief structure that print works differently from digital. And maybe if we wanted to seriously look at it, if we wanted to seriously understand something, we would say, okay, I'm going to read this one in print, or it's digital, I'm going to print it out. As so many of us in academia do, you may read something first online, say a journal article, and say, no, I really need to think more about this, and print it out. Then there's the question that Marianne Wolf, who knows an incredible amount about reading and reading digitally versus in print. She's a neuroscientist now at UCLA in California. The question that she asks, if our brain changed historically to develop to learn to read, because the brain came maybe programmed for speech, but not for reading, will reading digitally encourage shallower thinking? And will that have effects on how our brain functions, even in the short term? You know, in the long term, we'll all be dead. But in the short term, will it have an effect on our brain? And then there's back to what I started this lecture with, namely boredom. Will print reading still seem more boring than screens? Will it seem more boring because we spent so much time with the entertainment things on screens? Or will it seem less boring because we just have had, we've had it up to our necks in screens and we just can't take it anymore? So we need to have research on what's going on now. If anybody wants to take the carrion call up, I'd be happy to partner with you. And why do I think this is so vital? To help us avoid a future that none of us wants. There is American University's Starbucks, and on the wall you see books. No, you don't. You see wallpaper. And when there are actually people in that Starbucks, you see almost no print. You see everybody's MacBook Air propped up. Thank you very much. And I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Naomi. I'm sure you've touched on so many things and given us so much data, so interesting. I guess there's something similar happening in Europe too, like, or at least until 2019, this decrease in the digital was going on here too. But certainly things are changing so rapidly. And certainly there's so many different experiences. Let me start with a question from Julia. Okay. Shall I open the microphone, or is it better? Well, you open the microphone and ask yourself, Julia.
Please.
Okay. Hello, sorry for the light. I'm quite dark here. Hi. So I actually, beforehand, I wanted to just tell you maybe a little bit of my experience, so you have a little bit of context. I'm currently starting a PhD in literature, children literature actually. And so before that, I studied to become a teacher for children from 3 to 10 years old, more or less. So I've stayed with children a lot. And so what I saw, so obviously I didn't study with like lots of colleagues of my age, but I saw what children do, and nowadays it's really hard to make them read a lot, like because they have so many inputs from like video games or cell phones or whatever, that it is really hard for them to just stay focused. Also during school, to just stay focused onto something, you know, just like listening or reading a little bit of the book. It is really hard. So that's kind of my experience with the newest generation, even newer than college students, right? And the second thing that I wanted to say about my experience is that I write a little bit of articles for Disney blogs, those kind of, it's not a job, it's just passion. I'm not paid or anything. But what I discovered, I don't know if it's the same thing for the English language, but what I discovered is that there are rules online for articles that are just, you know, fun articles or something. So what they ask me usually is the language has to be really simplified. Like you cannot use passive forms, you cannot use too long sentences, because the audience will just, you know, close the article and won't read it. So what they ask me is to make it really simple and to highlight little words so that people will just, you know, scroll on it and understand it all, you know. So during your presentation, I was just like, this is so obvious that people find it more easy to like focus on online or digitally, because when they read on a book, they don't have to highlight, they have to highlight, right? So it's more difficult. So my question is like, is it like psychological? Is it something that it's going to get worse in years? And also I wanted to ask if maybe the new generations also are really fond into the environment and how paper is important, you know, so like they won't print too much. They're really fond into saving the earth and everything. So maybe printing too much, it's also not into their chores, you know, like it's not kind of, I don't know, but I wanted to ask that too.
Many good questions. Let me start backwards, if I might. First with the environmental issue. I've had many students say, I won't print stuff off, you're killing the earth, whatever. I used to have students when I would hand them articles that I had printed out for them, because I knew if I handed it to them, rather than say, go read it online, they would read it if I handed it to them. They told me, I'm much more likely to read it if you hand it to me than if I have to look online for the same thing. But they told me I killed the Amazon rainforest by, but it is also the case that paper is recyclable, trees are renewable, and the things that digital devices do in terms of harm to the environment and the people who mine the rare earth chemicals are horrendous. So it's not clear what actually helps the environment. Okay. In terms of highlighting things on a screen to say this is important, if you go back about to 200 years ago, when books were printed, often they would be in the margins, a little summary of what was important on that page, to do exactly the kind of thing that highlighting, not exactly, but a parallel to what that highlighting of words on a screen now does. So you're right, people are looking for something useful. Interestingly, there's a study that was done on if you're buying used books, would you, as a college student, would you rather buy books that don't have any highlighting or underlining in them, or books that do? Would you pay more if it has highlighting or underlining? You'd think, no, I want a clean book. I'd pay more for, no, people would prefer, students, statistically, not all students, I doubt you, would prefer books that are already marked up, so they don't have to do that themselves. They only look at the, quotes, important parts, which may or may not actually be important. On the issue of language simplification for things like blogs, the first question that comes to mind is the intention to write things that would be accessible to second language speakers? Because if you have as your audience, and I simply don't know who the intended audience is, you know, so get rid of the passive and don't make the sentences too long and don't make the vocabulary too difficult. If your intended audience is people who have varying levels of fluency in English as a second language, then to say keep it simple makes a certain amount of sense. In the United States, the Voice of America, which was a television, first radio and then television system that went around the world, okay, you know, blasting out, we hope not propaganda, but just good American programming. They have a template, they have guidelines, because I had some students who used to work there, to simplify the language that would go out in English to other parts of the world to make it accessible. So I just don't know whether it's, oh, our readers are so dumb, they're native speakers of English, but they don't really want to have to cope, whether it's that or it's make sure you can be available to a wider audience. Now going to your first question about what's happening with children's ability to focus. This is an enormous problem. And the problem is, I think, reflected in how kids settle down or don't settle down to read, but I don't think that's the source. Because kids can focus on a lot of things if they feel there's a reason to focus on it. Part of the problem, again, I'll speak from an American perspective, and this is not to praise America, it's to damn it. We have parked kids in front of televisions as babysitters. We have said, you know, you go to a restaurant. And to be fair, I saw this when I was in Venezia. I was at a restaurant in Modena, and there was a child who was just talking too much, you know, crying too much. So, I mean, not quite talking, sort of a 2-year-old. And the father brings out the mobile phone, sticks out the video, silence. Okay, so we have been getting these babysitters, and if our kids now can't concentrate on things that take more mental energy, to some extent, we did it to them. We have ignored them. Okay, that doesn't mean we don't have to solve the problem. So part of the way to solve the problem is by reading with a child, reading to a child, something that used to be very common, but it's not so common anymore, to read to kids who know how to read in a whole family. And it's hard to do, and people are busy. And right now, when you're working at home and going to school at home, and you're teaching your kids at home, how the heck you do all this is really, really tough. But unless one takes that as a priority, we'll never solve the problem. That's for starters.
Thank you. Thank you
for
very
the
much.
question.
There's another question from the chat. Jenny Cazzola says, thank you very much for this very interesting lecture. It made me feel a little old because during the first lockdown in Italy, I had a nearly physical craving for printed paper, but maybe I'm just too old-fashioned. I also started diving more deeply in the podcast scene, and my question is, I'm sorry, there's a new message coming. My question would be, could you shortly outline if there's also a change in the way people are approaching audio, also in education?
Yes, I would love to, because about I don't know, a fifth of the book that I just wrote is on audio. So I'd be delighted to talk about audio. But first, let me come to this. First, let me think about with you this question of craving print. I don't know how old you are, but you're not old. That is, there are a lot of people who are feeling, I need to be grounded. I need something to hold on to. I need the earth, as it were. So one of the reasons that many of the independent bookstores in the United States are surviving is customers are saying, you know, either things are being mailed up, or you're doing curbside pickup, you know, because everyone drives, so you have your car and you go to the curb. One of the reasons that they're surviving is people are feeling a need for print. How long that will last, I don't know. The price issue is going to be for darn sure a real challenge. But going to the audio issue, audio sales are going up incredibly month by month, year by year. Again, this was pre-pandemic. The literature, okay, so take podcasts, and I will show maybe how old-fashioned I am, or maybe that I like to read text, even if I'm reading it online. Podcasts are meant to be listened to, but many of them also have transcriptions. I would prefer to read the transcription because I want to be able to stop, think about something, make a note to myself somewhere, as opposed to listen from start to finish when I'm unlikely to go back and re-listen. Okay, but yes, podcasts are becoming very, very common. What we know from the literature comparing learning from audio versus learning from text, again, whether the text is digital or print, most of the studies were done with print, but it could be digital as well, is that people tend to learn more from the text. And there are a number of studies that show that. Similarly, there are studies comparing seeing something with video as opposed to seeing the text and then maybe some slides with some pictures that go along with what's in some of the video. And again, it is particularly for the more serious questions, as opposed to the pebbles on the beach surface questions, text seems to be preferable. That said, one of the trends in lower education, particularly in the United States, is to have combined text and audio. And the text may be digital, the text may be print. This was a move that started for kids who had learning disabilities of varying sorts, for people who have profound hearing loss, but it's a trend that particularly in lower school has been developed because you can, or for people learning English as a second language, and I know that literature better than learning, say, Italian as a second language. What has happened is if you can hear how a word is pronounced, a word that you don't know, you have a better chance of feeling, okay, I can make sense of this word. I don't just gloss it off, you gloss over it and forget it, than if you just see it, in print and don't hear it. So what I see happening in education is two things. First, a move, particularly in lower school, say kindergarten through maybe age 10-ish, 12-ish, something like that, to use more audio with text. However, what I also see happening, and that worries me silly, is a number of my colleagues, and I'm guilty of having done it as well, to assign a podcast or to make a podcast or to do a video, to make a video or to assign a YouTube or to assign a TED Talk, and somehow assume that students are going to learn as much. If you don't train people how to take notes, how to re-listen, it ain't going to happen. So that's part of my consideration. Okay.
Okay, there's two more questions, or there's a question from Sadaf who wants to use the microphone and ask directly.
Please.
Hi.
Yes.
Hello.
First of all, thank you for your fascinating presentation. I really appreciate it. I remember that I was forced to look for a word in dictionary in a paper version in reading courses at university because our lecturer believed that as long as you're searching, the results stayed longer in our memory. He believed that if you find it fast, you forget it fast. My question is, do you think that it could be the same in case of reading in a paper version versus digital format?
It's an interesting question that sort of has two sides to it. Let me address what I was first hearing and then come to the print versus paper, and I'll tell you why. When spell check came along in Microsoft Word, as well as in other kinds of word processing programs that used to have more popularity, it became so easy not to have to go to paper dictionary. But by going into a paper dictionary, which I mean, I still have my Webster's Collegiate Dictionary sitting next to my desk here at home. I'm not in Modena, actually. I am at home. And I have one in my office. I haven't been to my office for 6 months, so I assume it's still there at the university. When I look it up, I focus on it. I think, oh, not just how to spell it, but how do you pronounce it? I think, oh, what's its etymology? I think, oh, it's got different definitions in British English or different spellings in British English than American. And I learn a lot about the word. So just that time I logged, you know, seat time, as it were, is greater if I am looking at something in paper, in this case, in a dictionary. For print versus paper, I think the real issue comes down to annotation and speed of reading and pausing. So annotation, I'm not just talking about underlining or highlighting, I'm talking about marginalia, of actually writing things or making symbols that make sense to you or drawing arrows. And some of this you can now do digitally, but we're much, much more likely, and we have data on this, to do it if we're reading in print, particularly if it's our print and not the library's book, than if we're reading digitally. And we know that that annotation, the things that make the reading passage yours, are what make you remember it. So the real issue to me is not so much the medium, but how we use the medium. And if we're using it, if we're using digital media to mark up, and you can do it now, but you have to decide to do it, to mark it up in a way that makes that reading ours, then it can be, I suspect, for long-term learning, because we don't have the long-term learning data, we just have the short test data, it can be as useful, but we haven't developed the pedagogy to make that happen.
Okay, there's two more questions. There's always two more questions. One from Federico Daupa, who says, thank you very much for this extremely interesting lesson. I have a question. I don't know if it's silly, but it's my curiosity. If I'm not mistaken, you mentioned at the beginning the fact that an interesting aspect to take into account when approaching digital, oops, I'm sorry.
Digital reading and okay. Maybe
I keep having problems with the movement when approaching digital reading and its role in learning. Is that two new messages, and I get even more confused.
Okay, so this is
you can read it.
Okay, so mention blah, 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 not blah, blah, blah for Federico, just my reading. This role in learning process is the way students may be negatively or positively affected in the way they can remember details in a novel or something similar. Do I think that one of the risks is the fact of not assimilating detailed information just because in digital versions they don't have the opportunity of handwriting, simply annotating the paper version. Many people told me handwriting is different from digital writing and that the first is more affected by a learning process. Yes, okay, so there's a lot of discussion of so-called haptics, of holding things, touching things, that suggests that writing by hand, taking notes by hand, is much more effective than, for example, taking notes on a computer where you're typing. And there was a famous study done, famous as things go, 4 or 5 years ago at Princeton University, indicating that students remembered more if they took notes by hand than if they typed notes on a computer, because of having to literally form every letter, but also having to decide what's important to write. we know that the fewer things you highlight or underline, the more you're likely to remember, because you had to decide, you had to have some cognitive activity going on. You had to decide what was worth remembering, what was worth annotating. Okay, so in terms of the novel issues, some people write in novels, some people don't. Some people fold a page down, the corner of a page if it's your own book, or put a little marker in or a sticky or whatever. So when you look at the book after you've put it down, you say, oh yeah, there was something there I wanted to remember. And you go back and maybe review just that sentence or that paragraph, even if you haven't taken notes separately, even if you haven't annotated separately. The real issue, and John Dewey and the whole progressive, we could say Maria Montessori, and the whole progressive education movement has said what matters is that you interact with the things that you are learning. The phrase in American education these days, and I'm sure that there's an equivalent elsewhere, is active learning. The question then becomes, how do you make reading something like a novel active learning? Sometimes it's by writing something in the novel. Sometimes it's writing something somewhere else. Sometimes it's putting a marker in. Sometimes it's stopping and thinking. So part of the question, and if I had a way to do this study, I would. If someone is interested, please go for it. Let me know what you're doing. Is to do a study on how often people pause when reading a novel in print versus digitally. So it's not just a question of, do you think it's shorter or longer if you read it in one medium or another, but take people who are serious readers. Or take something that's a really engaging story, but is beautifully written. And you want to stop and say, wait a second, that's a gorgeous sentence. Would you do that if you were reading digitally? Would you be more likely to do it with your reading in print? Those are the kinds of questions I think we need to be asking. So researchers out there, please join.
Okay, I think I can read the next one. Thank you for your presentation from Michael Schlauch. I have a question. Scholars like Gunther Kress from Social Semiotics, New Literacy Studies argued that digital text becomes simpler from an alphabetic writing perspective, but more complex because of forms of multimodal representation, and that we tend to underestimate the semiotic meaning-making work behind that. Do you think deep reading can be made compatible with the nature of multimodal texts with new media, within new media?
Okay. As they all have been, excellent question. So let's first look at the question of whether digital alphabetic writing made digital text simpler. I'm not sure I understand that, but we can get to that in a moment, because particularly if you're using a PDF, it's the same characters that you would have in written text as you have digitally. Printed text as you'd have digitally. But go to the multimedia issue. There have been a number of people, I'm thinking of Don Liu in the United States and Julie Quiro in the United States, one at the University of Connecticut, the other at the University of Rhode Island, who have argued, as other people have as well, that they would say digital reading, but they really mean multimodal, multi-document reading. They would say that is more complex than reading in print. Well, if you have multi in front of a text, of course it's likely to be more difficult. So there have been a number of studies suggesting that reading multiple documents calls for additional kinds of reading skills that are not what is at work when you are reading a single linear text. You have to decide, for example, if you're doing a search for something, how much time to spend on a site. Studies done by Ladislau Samaron, the University of Valencia, and his colleagues have done a number of these studies comparing what you need to do when reading across multiple documents. You have to figure out who's reputable, because you get some degree of certification from the fact something is printed, that probably somebody reviewed the text, and if it was totally off the wall, then it wasn't going to get printed. You have much more open publishing happening online. So you have to be able to evaluate text. You have to know when to follow hyperlinks, when not to. We know that people who have more limited short-term memory tend to do worse when there are hyperlinks because they go down the rabbit holes and don't know when to come back up. People who have better short-term working memory are better at handling hyperlinks. So there are a lot of complexities to the question there. Now the question is, can we train people to productively handle multimodal reading? And I'm going to say here by multimodal, that may not be what the question is asking, so Michael, please forgive me. But I'm going to focus on what we know most about, which is using multiple texts. And we can train people how to do it successfully. So for example, there's some eye tracking studies that Vladislav Someron and his colleagues have done to look at people who do productive moving from site to site and looking at the credentials of who has posted the material in the first place. And he's done these videos and he's used those as training videos for other students to say, you could learn how to be successful. This is the way it works well. This is the way it doesn't work well. But that's a technology and a pedagogy, sorry, that's a pedagogy we haven't yet developed. In terms of multimodal texts, learning how to use something that's video, learning how to use something that's audio at the same time there's printed text. There's a fair amount of literature out on using multiple modalities. There's a huge collection of books on this and articles and whatever, and some replication of information seems to be productive and some seems to not be productive. And we don't know enough on how this works. So you take the literature on reading a text at the same time you're listening to it auditorily. There are some studies that say, absolutely, this helps comprehension. There are other studies that say, no, we know that getting the same message twice calls you for doubling your cognitive effort, and therefore you do worse. So we don't know enough about material that has the same amount of information, that has duplicative information as opposed to complementary information. And we just need to learn more.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question from Maria Sofia Falcone. In your view, do you believe the type of school system, i.e. how young adults have been taught notions from primary school to high school, influences their preferences and performances in terms of print versus digital? On the same note, have you noticed any intercultural difference on this between the US and Norway or other countries in which you've done research?
Another question after my heart. To some extent, if a school system says, this is a good way to learn, and you learn that from way on early, you tend to believe it. Part of the problem, part of the challenge right now, part of the reason that I wrote the book that I just wrote, which is very pedagogical in nature. I mean, it's written for educators. It's not, I mean, scholars, I hope, will learn from it too. It's got all the research in it, but it's written for people who make educational decisions. People who are teachers from kindergarten through graduate school don't know any of this literature. It's not their fault. But what is really clear is people tend to believe what they're told by authority figures. So I don't know what the world is going to look like in terms of what people tell you their preferences are in another 2, 3, or 5 years. Just as the things we grow up eating seem to be us the right foods to eat. I have a dear, dear Italian friend who's in her 70s. And she's a fabulous cook, but she will not go to any restaurant in the United States. She will cook Italian food and do it very well. She has more fluent English than I sometimes, but she knows American culture like the back of her hand. She will not change her cuisine. So I don't know what's going to happen there. What I do know is there's some really interesting cultural differences. So when you look even back in the mid 2011, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, you look at sales of ebooks. The United States had the largest percent sale of ebooks. It was roughly 20%, it got up to roughly 20% of the book market. The UK had the next highest. And then it fell off a cliff. You would go to Germany, you'd go to France, you'd go to Italy, you'd go to Spain, and it was somewhere between 2, 3, or 4, or 5% of the market. And how that's changed with the pandemic, I don't know. Okay, so as a result, similarly, you would look in the United States at how many independent bookstores there are. There were these big book chains, most of which have now gone out of business. You know, Barnes and Noble is the last one left, barely hanging on. And the independent bookstores went out of business. You compare that with Europe, you walk down the block and there's a bookstore, and then you walk to the next block, or maybe 2 blocks over, and there's a bookstore. So there's a book culture in other countries that doesn't exist in the United States anymore, unfortunately. Okay, so in Norway, there's a print book culture. For darn sure, in Italy, there's a print book culture. In Germany, in France, and then we could go to other countries. In some other countries, it's shifting somewhat. So in Japan, there's been a heavy book culture, but there's also a digital culture. Similarly in Israel, it's become very heavily a digital culture, in part because you can get books from the United States and other places in the world really easily. You don't have to pay for shipping. So I think there really is an awful lot of cultural considerations. Similarly, in places like Norway, the government gives subventions for translating books. And I bet you it's translating into print. Similarly, I understand it's also the case in Italy, that there are ways of getting either government or foundation subventions for doing translations. That does not exist in the United States. Okay, so there are different cultural attitudes towards books in general. There are different attitudes towards the importance of print. And my biggest hope, that's all I can say, is that people will get so zoomed out, such Zoom fatigue, such digital reading fatigue, just as they got fatigue from doom scrolling on their phones, that the print is going to matter in a way it hasn't recently. That doesn't mean that higher education is going to shift. My real fear, and I know more about what's happening in higher education than lower education, except lower education was trying to go digital even pre-pandemic. And because of open educational resources, they're free. And if you don't have the money, then that's what you do. My fear is that in higher education, the publishers have run the show. The publishers have driven down the cost incredibly, and I credit them with that. And students have no money. I mean, they really, really, really have no money. Their families really, really, really have no money. And if something is free or inexpensive, you don't get a choice. And then as that generation, and then, let's call it the next 3 to 5 years, grows up, I don't know what their attitudes towards print will be. So let us pray.
There's a final question. I think it will have to be a final question from Emily. She says, I have a question regarding educational context and e-learning context. Researchers have been trying to improve digital education and digital experience as a productive way of learning. May I ask your opinion about it?
Yes. All right. I am a realist. I may have personal preferences in what I do, but I am absolutely a realist. Digital education is not going anywhere anytime soon. Let me make a prediction about online classes, and then I'll make a prediction about I'll make a hope. I'll offer a hope as to what can happen with pedagogy. My prediction is, now that so many faculty members, at least in the United States, and I can't vouch for what's happened elsewhere, have learned how to do online learning. There had been this press for it. Remember, we have to, educate students away from their preference for print. There has been a huge move to doing online learning in the United States. Part of the reason is private universities need to get tuition dollars to stay in business. They design online programs for students around the world so that they can increase their tuition revenues. Those are all online programs. That happened pre-pandemic. Now that students are used to being able to do their studying in their pajamas and to go to class, maybe they put a t-shirt on, but who knows after that, they're not going to want to go back to having to show up in class for all their classes. So online digital learning, particularly at the college level, is going to be much larger than it was before. What's going to happen in K through 12, I think because of the way we describe it here is it's important to have socialization, of getting to be with other people. That's also true as you get older, but it's especially true when you're younger. So there's been a real move to try to get people to try to get K through 12 education working again in the United States because of the socialization issues, because there are people who get their meals at school because their families don't have enough money. There are people who are abused at home and they only get arrested. This is real. That's one of the rationales for trying to open the schools. So I think K through 12, we're going to have more in-person and more print. Universities, I think, will have less in-person and less print. This all goes by way of saying, though, we've got to work on pedagogy that's successful. And there are a number of people who are trying to figure out how to make digital pedagogy, both in terms of how you do an online class, but also in terms of digital reading and use of digital materials more successful. We're going to have to work really fast in terms of audio and video, because we really have this assumption that you just assign one of these podcasts or videos and all the learning just magically unfolds. Doesn't happen.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we've already gone beyond the time we asked. I'm sure there would be more questions, but we'll collect them for next year, hopefully, or for next time. Otherwise, it will have to be another digital session. We still should be grateful that we could have this. So that
I am delighted, and I thank you for the opportunity, and I wish everybody good health. And now I'm going to go check what the election findings are.
Yes, can understand that. Thank you very much, Naomi.
Thank you all.
Really very useful and stimulating as usual. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. See you next Thursday. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.